Learn how to invest in ways that benefit the world rather than harm it in this video. Do you recall when "greed is good" served as the catchphrase for investors everywhere? In truth, it wasn't that long ago, just a few decades. The cultural climate has altered, however, as the negative social and environmental effects of unbridled greed become all too clear. Additionally, the literal climate has also shifted. The knowledge contained in this audiobook fills that need. Investors who want to alter things, modify them for the better, and alter them permanently will find a how-to manual here. Divesting from fossil fuels and pursuing do-no-harm principles are insufficient. It also doesn't work to diversify your portfolio with a few socially conscious businesses. This audiobook demonstrates how to approach the problems the world is currently experiencing as systems rather than as individual problems. You'll discover how to choose which topics to focus on, why sustainable investing falls short, and how divestment contributed to the end of apartheid in South Africa. The social, financial, and environmental systems that society depends on are strengthened via system-level investing. Try to picture your typical investor by closing your eyes for a moment. What sort of individual do you see? Forget about the investor's attractiveness and other such matters. As an alternative, consider whether the person you are visualizing has a keen social conscience. Is this typical investor charitable and socially conscious? Do they care about others and are they devoted to improving the world? Sadly, the likelihood is against it. You're not alone if the investor you saw was vested in themselves, greedy, and only interested in making a quick buck. That stereotype of investors has existed for far too long, which is why system-level investing is necessary. The main takeaway is that system-level investing supports the economic, social, and environmental frameworks upon which society depends. Too many investors only have their own narrowly self-serving interests in mind. They invest in order to increase their returns and, if they manage a fund, the returns of their clients. Yes, these investors follow the law. But in their eyes, that's the extent of their responsibilities to the rest of the world. Investors at the systemic level, however, hold a different perspective. They make investments in methods to build the structures that make human life sustainable and equitable rather than concentrating on short-term financial rewards. This makes sense if you think of it as a sustainable investment. Both system-level investing and sustainable investing advocate that maximizing returns over the long term shouldn't always be the top priority. They both have clear environmental and social concerns. However, systemic investors go further. Not only fund managers or powerful chief financial officers, system-level investors can also be casual hobbyists. But what distinguishes them from sustainability investors is that they are more persistent, focused, and engaged. They don't merely buy stock in renewable energy firms and call it a day. System-level investors lobby for new government regulations to force businesses to comply. They support contemporary industry norms. And they work together with other like-minded investors to bring about change. They seek systemic answers, to put it briefly. Gains in the short term that jeopardize essential infrastructure like the healthcare system, consumer protection laws, and climate stability are worthless. They are actually significant losses. Realizing this, system-level investors make investments that strengthen and harden our underlying systems. Based on consensus, relevance, and effectiveness, focus your investments. Saying you want to enhance the most important systems in the world is great, but are you really willing to put your money where your mouth is? That is a unique situation. The issue goes beyond the fact that when money is involved, individuals have a tendency to lose confidence. Another, more fundamental problem is that many of us simply don't know where to begin. The problem with systems is that they are large by definition. They are also intricately interwoven and complex since they are systems. So how can you as an investor attempt to alter something this big and complicated? How do you select your investing priorities? Well, it's difficult to make a mistake if you adhere to these 3 key requirements. Targeting your investments based on consensus, relevance, and efficacy is the main takeaway from this. Consensus is the first rule to keep in mind, according to the writers. It's really simple, really. You might argue that an issue satisfies the consensus requirement if there is broad agreement that it is valid and significant. For instance, there is widespread agreement that expanding access to healthcare globally is a good objective. In other words, everyone agrees that it is significant. The second principle is relevancy. This one is really more of a financial one. A topic is deemed relevant if it has the ability to materially impact a range of assets. A problem should affect a variety of businesses and different kinds of assets rather than just one specific class of investments, like real estate, for example. The third factor is effectiveness. This idea essentially asks how much power an investor actually has over the situation at hand. How capable of bringing about change are you? Exist any other investors who share your views that you could collaborate with? Is the general population aware of the problem and willing to assist? In other words, select cases that you can win rather than hopeless ones. Applying the three guiding principles of consensus, relevance, and effectiveness can help you find the systemic problems on which you should concentrate your investments. Bonds can be used to finance systemic upgrades. We mentioned the value of assets in the previous chapter. We stated that if a systemic issue had the potential to damage assets of multiple types, not only real estate or equities, you might consider it relevant to your investing strategy. Assets, however, are more than just valuable things that are susceptible to systemic changes. Assets can be used to attempt and strengthen vital systems' resilience as well as to stop some of the dangers that put them in danger. Of course, assets come in a variety of shapes and sizes, including cash, real estate, stocks, bonds, and private equity. We'll concentrate on only one in this chapter, a kind of asset that has the potential to seriously improve systems and the lives of those who use them. In this chapter, then, we'll concentrate on bonds. The main takeaway is that bonds can be used to finance systemic reforms. As you may already be aware, a bond is a debt given to a company or the government that can be exchanged among investors. As you may already be aware, a bond is a debt given to a company or the government that can be exchanged among investors. Bonds are rather easy to understand. An organization can raise financing by selling bonds rather than resorting to a bank. In doing so, it consents to pay the principal amount of the loan as well as the interest payments as they become due. Bonds are a popular choice among traditional investors since they are a relatively safe kind of investment and can be a useful tool for balancing out a portfolio's risk profile. Bonds appeal to sustainable investors because they allow them to assist non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and provide funding for the construction of essential infrastructure, such as roads, sewers, hospitals, and schools. Naturally, system-level investors are drawn to these advantages as well, and they go one step further. Investors at the systemic level are interested in new types of bonds, such as the green bonds that financial institutions started issuing in 2007. These bonds are used to finance environmental initiatives including clean water and energy production and sustainable transportation. Green bonds really paved the way for COVID bonds, a special kind of bond created to help a country recover from the consequences of the global coronavirus pandemic. Investors operating at the system level should take note of statements regarding portfolio design and investment philosophy. We've looked at some of the rules that system-level investors follow so far, as well as how bonds can be used to finance systemic development. What about the equipment employed by conventional investors, though? Can they be used in a new way to promote systemic change? They can, as evidenced in this chapter. We'll focus on how a system-level investor can employ assertions about portfolio development and investment beliefs. Portfolio creation refers to the selection of particular investments that go together to form your portfolio. Financial institutions also use investing belief statements as a form of paper to justify their investment choices. Even traditional investors are familiar with these ideas, but system-level investors can also benefit from them in certain special ways. The main takeaway from this is that system-level investors should pay close attention to portfolio creation and assertions of investment beliefs. An investment belief statement, IBS, as previously indicated, describes how a financial institution views the markets and its place in them. In a nutshell, it expresses in simple terms the institution's investment philosophy. This is good news for investors at the system level. An individual investor can first utilize an institution's IBS to determine whether her values coincide with the decisions the institution is likely to make on investments. Will this organization, for instance, invest in fossil fuels? Or does it demonstrate a commitment to renewable energy sources? In reality, the California retirement system CalPERS does just that. Responsible environmental measures are crucial to risk management, according to its IBS. It promises to address systemic concerns, such as climate change, and to make judicious use of scarce resources. A system-level investor should be on the lookout for claims of this nature. The second component of conventional investing that we addressed at the beginning of the audiobook is portfolio construction. What about it? Well, it usually entails risk management, which is choosing investments with a low chance of losing value. Systemic risks should also be taken into account for a system-level investor in this study. For instance, a system-level investor could question whether investment in even the most stable oil corporation is genuinely risk-free given the threat that fossil fuels pose to our ecosystem. Investors can demand reform by establishing standards. CEOs are rare among investors. They don't hold positions on the boards of large corporations. Because of their limited influence, individuals frequently need to act indirectly if they want to affect systemic change. The issue is how to go about it. As we previously stated, system-level investors must band together. They must identify a shared goal, settle on a comprehensive plan of action, then collaborate to see it through. You may recall that one of the factors that these investors assess when deciding which issues to address is efficacy. They must consider their chances of strengthening a certain system and preventing the threats to its stability. System-level investors must first assess the tools at their disposal to change the system in order to give a precise response to that question. The practice of defining standards is among the most successful. The main takeaway is that investors have the power to demand reform by setting criteria. In the second part of the 20th century, a number of anti-racist activities were led by civil rights campaigner Reverend Leon Sullivan. Setting standards was one of his favorite strategies for combating discrimination. Setting standards involves avoiding businesses, markets, and nations that follow unfavorable and harmful practices. The intention is to starve them of resources and assistance, which will eventually drive them to adjust their behavior for the good of the system as a whole. Leon Sullivan actually carried out that action. His appointment as the first black board member at General Motors came about as a result of protests about the company's predominantly white board of directors. A few years later, while apartheid was still in place in South Africa, he set his eyes on bringing about structural change there. GM was one of the largest employers of black South Africans at the time. Disturbed by the prejudice they endured, Sullivan created the Sullivan Principles, a short list of demands meant to guarantee that black employees were treated fairly and with respect. A number of significant U.S. public pension funds ceased investing in any company that followed apartheid regulations, and anti-apartheid investors refused to do business with organizations that did not uphold the Sullivan Principles. These kinds of initiatives ultimately compelled South Africa to approve legislation repealing its racial segregation policy. The anti-apartheid movement's achievement with the Sullivan Principles demonstrates that standard setting can be successful when investors put out a unified front. Always have an open mind when it comes to financial managers. It's become harder and harder to ignore the harm that unrestrained, short-term profiteering is causing to our societies and the environment, as you may have noticed if you've been reading the news lately. It's beneficial in many ways that we are being motivated to take action. It's also encouraging to see that financial institutions have caught on and are adapting their offerings to appeal to customers who have social and environmental concerns. However, the dramatic surge in popularity of sustainable investing has its own drawbacks. One of the problems with these causes popularity is that it can be difficult to tell who is truly invested in them from who is merely riding the public's excitement for them. The main takeaway from this is to always question financial managers' behavior. There are a few crucial questions you should always ask when assessing the objectives of financial managers. Whether a management has an explicit and unambiguous policy handling systemic challenges is the first thing you need to find out. This can take a variety of shapes. It shouldn't be that rigid, but ideally it should resemble the prior assertions about investment beliefs. Any type of public statement made on the record can be used to express a serious commitment to system-level investing. Ideally, the statement should be concise, specific, and actionable. But it's your responsibility to evaluate these claims critically. Use your best judgment. Does the manager in question act in accordance with her stated policies in practice? Does she ensure that her organization's influence is monitored and reported on? If not, be on the lookout because her ostensible dedication to systemic investing might just be lip service. Finally, simply aiming for systemic change is insufficient for a financial manager to be worthwhile. She must be able to demonstrate a track record of genuine success. Has the management had a good impact on the system? Has she collaborated on developing practical solutions with her peers, NGOs, and other stakeholders? You might have a winner on your hands if the answer to those questions is yes. These audiobooks' main message is that investment tactics that prioritize profits over society and the environment have outlived their usefulness. Today's investors must identify ways to enhance essential systems rather than investing at the expense of them. You can achieve this by deciding which problems are desirable to address, picking the appropriate assets, and utilizing portfolio architecture and investment belief statements. Additionally, standard setting can be used to pressure businesses to embrace higher standards while retaining the focus on self-described, responsible financial managers.